So just as we follow the money with regards to military-industrial complex, important to follow the money in politics in general. Republicans have long been very comfortable with dark money. They've been broadly opposed to any sort of campaign finance reform. They've been happy to have, especially post-Citizens United, all of the corporate money and special interest money they possibly can flow into their coffers. Koch Industries, a big benefactor, financing all of these different organizations that funded a bunch of conservative-leaning groups and Republican politicians. All right. Democrats have not only caught up to Republicans in this regard, but they have actually, by some measures, according to New York Times analysis, exceeded what the Republicans are pulling in this dark money. And what we mean by dark money is money that comes in and you don't disclose where it's coming from.
Essentially untraceable in terms of its origin.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and throw this New York Times investigation up on the screen. They say Democrats decried dark money, then they won with it in 2020. A New York Times analysis reveals how the left outdid the right at raising and spending millions from undisclosed donors to defeat Donald Trump and win power in Washington. Let me read a little bit from this analysis they have here. They say, spurred by opposition to then-President Trump, donors and operatives allied with the Democratic Party embraced dark money with fresh zeal, pulling in by some measures more than Republicans. The analysis shows that 15 of the most politically active nonprofit organizations that generally align with the Dems spent more than $1.5 billion in 2020. Compare that to roughly $900 million spent by a comparable sample of 15 of the most politically active groups aligned with the GOP. One of the groups that they point to in particular as the new sort of money powerhouse on the Democratic side is called the 1630 Fund.
Yes.
They've received mystery donations as large as $50 million. They've given grants to more than 200 groups. They've spent a total of $410 million in 2020 alone. That is more than the Democratic National Committee did itself. And they talk to somebody with the group who says, listen, while we are dedicated to reducing the influence of special interest money in our politics, we're also committed to level the playing field for progressives. This is insane. I mean, one of the reasons Trump got elected that I think was undersold was his talk about draining the swamp.
Yes.
His rhetoric, which I think was very effective about, hey, listen, I'm a rich guy. I know how this system works. I played this system, and I'm not going to be influenced by all this money because I'm already rich. So it doesn't impact me. And now, of course, that all turned out to be ridiculous. He was like wildly corrupt and all of those things. But I think that rhetoric had a lot of appeal. You are just a blatant, disgusting hypocrite if you're out there on the one hand saying, oh, yes, we care very much about money in politics and we want to get the money out of politics and campaign finance reform. And then you're spending all your time raising millions and millions of dollars from dark money donors and being propped up by these secretive groups that, the American people have no insight into where this money is coming from. And ultimately, Democratic Party aside, this type of infiltration of money in politics, this is a big part of why you have this disconnect between what people want Washington to do and what Washington actually does. So when you have both parties just completely run by outside dark money, it's a disastrous state of affairs for democracy.
Oh, this is so bad. And one of the most repulsive parts of this that I did not even know was legal is that billionaires can actually give to a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, per the tax code, which allows them to take a tax break, Krystal. That 501c3 can then give money to a 501c4, which is a political action committee. And that political action committee, the 501c4, can then give money to a dark money group. So you have essentially made it so that a billionaire can actually get a tax write-off for then eventually basically straw donating to these dark money groups doing all kinds of stuff. And here's the thing, these things are totally legal. They can basically spend money on whatever they want, all kinds of political advertising and commercials and more that, things that you may not even think, Facebook ads, advocacy campaigns. And, the main thing I would say to the Republicans is you guys invented this and now you're just getting beat at your own game, which is actually the most pathetic part because you look at this. Major nonprofit groups aligned with the Republican Party totaled $972 million in 2020. And for the Democrats, it was $1.7 billion. So they're being beat almost double at the game that they invented. And now it's just a slow ball towards what? I mean, zero representation in our terms of our actual politics. And so many of these people who say that they want to crack down on any of the, crack down on secret funding, Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat from Rhode Island. He's like, yeah, but with any luck, now that Democrats are more seriously in the dark money business, Republicans may begin to support some transparency. So he's even admitting the game there, being like, yeah, well, now that we're winning, maybe they'll come along with us. But how many of these Democrats are actually going to go ahead and sign on to this legislation? None. This is going to be the status quo forever. They'll never close it.
And the problem is at this point, I mean, to really deal with it, you probably need a constitutional amendment. I mean, it's just become a very difficult.
Oh, right, because the Supreme Court.
Look, I actually like Andrew Yang's idea of democracy dollars to at least help to try to put some money in the hands of the American people as a counterweight example. It's a very difficult problem to solve at this point. I mean, I guess that is the potential silver lining, is just like with the stock trading stuff, when it became about Nancy Pelosi, suddenly Republicans were like, oh,
okay, let's do it.
This is a good talking point for us politically as well. Let's get in on this. I mean, if they see this as their political advantage, but the problem is with money in politics that the people who are in power disproportionately benefited from the current regime. So are they going to undercut themselves and their sources of funding and their sources of power, especially people like, Pelosi's a perfect example. Part of how she maintains such an iron grip on the Democratic caucus is because she raises a lot of money and then she gives it out. And so she uses that and weaponizes that so that people feel like they can't criticize her, feel like they can't break from whatever the party line is, because they need those campaign contributions ultimately to keep coming in. So that's a major source of every single politician in Washington who has a real power position. This money flowing through the system is a major, major source of their power. The other piece of this that I find to be interesting and troubling is you'll see the reason why Democrats were able to jump to this big lead was all about Trump. So on the Republican side, some of the big donors didn't like Trump, and they either stayed out or they started entities that ultimately back Democrats. And on the Democratic side, and we've seen this play out time and time again, they basically made the argument to their people that, listen, Trump is so bad that any means are justified to be able to get him out of there. So, the end of getting Donald Trump justifies the means of letting the dark money flow and throwing out any principles that we had in that regard. And so the specter of him as this existential threat is used to weaponize money in politics, to amp that up, to just abandon their principles on that regard. Of course, we saw the way that specter was used to discard any concerns about the policy direction or the efficacy or the competence or, the mental acuity of Joe Biden. You can't criticize him. We can't have someone, like Bernie, who actually believes in things and might do things. We've just got to go for whoever the electable person is. And so it really has been used. They've used Trump very effectively to maintain this status quo and to even amp up these nefarious forces that, if you actually care about the future of democracy, things like this rampant money in politics is way more damaging than anything the people on January 6th could have done.
Oh, I mean, yeah, and that's probably the most controversial thing about all of this, right? But anybody with a brain is like, yeah, people spending billions of dollars to try and, rig the election in whichever way they want, that seems pretty bad. This is also why I get so frustrated, Krystal, with a lot of Republicans, now all of a sudden just waking up to all of this stuff. I remember the Time magazine piece that came out. It was like how Democrats fortified the election. I mean, look, a lot of the libertarian ways that we approach campaign finance funding actually paved the way for billionaires to try and do everything in their power, which was a lot of power, in order to try and swing the election away from Trump. I mean, if you're really behind and for campaign finance reform and more, let's go. But look, it'll never pass through the existing Republican politicians because they're just as dirty as the rest of them. Yeah. Now they are, they've been in bed with the Kochs and with all of the intersecting 501c3s and 501c4s for so many years that they don't even know how to operate without them. It's like a third arm of the RNC. 100%. It's the same thing now with the DNC. And this actually makes it worse because now I don't think it will ever change. But it's a very good peek behind the curtain. If you want to know how it all really works, I mean, this stuff, the 1634, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
What's happening? They gave Bill Krystal $40 million. How do you give that freaking moron who ran a magazine into the ground and then ran the, and then start defending democracy or whatever, one of the wrongest, most evil people in American politics, and this guy gets $40 million? This is what they're spending your money on. So if you're one of those people who fell for one of these ads, Stop Trump or whatever on Facebook, I don't blame you. It's okay. Emotions were hot, but be real about where your money is really going, because it's not the way that you think it is.
The only thing that I will say, as a little, to not have this whole segment be total gloom and doom, is the alternative power center of having grassroots funds and candidates who, truly are supported and able to win office based on these small dollar donations across the country. That's a new phenomenon, and that's a very positive direction, because that means at least you'll have a few politicians who can get elected and can get into some position of power without relying on these big money donor networks. And the other thing I would say is this money is very effective at the local level, very effective even, like, the lower you go down on the ballot, the more that the big dollars ultimately matter. When you get to the presidential level, it actually really, Hillary Clinton had a dollar advantage over Trump.
Trump still beat her.
And Trump still beat her. Because all of this money, you're going to buy more ads, you're going to inundate us even more. People are looking at these candidates. And so I don't know that the money makes that much of a difference ultimately at the presidential level. It does matter a lot lower down on the ballot. So I guess that's kind of a optimistic thing, that this money ultimately there at the electoral level doesn't totally swing things at the presidential level, but it dramatically impacts the way that they govern once they ultimately get here. And that, to me, is maybe the most pernicious part of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. And so look, we can defeat it. Don't think that it's all gone. This show shows you that user-supported content can and, maybe in the long run can win, but it's going to be a titanic and gigantic fight. This is not just what we're up against. This is what any candidate who stands up against this. And ultimately, though, it's what you are up against. It is against you and your popular will.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.